So a while back I talked about the DPS problem, why it feels like there's just a little bit too many DPS, there's a lot of people picking up this role, and why in general so many people are picking up DPS. But today I'm going to talk about the tank problem, which is almost exactly opposite. Why there are so little tank mains in your game, why it's so hard to find one of them, and why so little people actually want to go out and play tank. Now, of course, as always, you will find some tank mains. It's not impossible to find them. In some games, you might find 3 or 4, but I'm talking about, in general, the average game, and again, from my own experience, so please do keep that in mind. With all that said, though, let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, which I think is one of the big problems about why there are so few tank players, is that tank is a very stressful role. Because if you mess up as this role, you really let down your team, and if you engage badly, you kind of screw over your team. If you let down your shield early, you kind of screw over your team. If you go in too far as Winston, you kind of screw over your team. And I think the problem about tank is that your team really does rely on you doing pretty well as this role. They play around you, they think you're going to protect them, and you kind of need to. And I think while it isn't impossibly hard to do that, I think it's a lot more stressful than a lot of the other roles. I mean, with support, for the most part, you play in the back line, you stay back, you heal your teammates, there you go with that. With DPS, of course, you are stressed to get damage, get kills, but if you make a few mistakes in the back line and don't hit people, I mean, who cares? You're getting less damage, you might be useless in that way, but I mean, you aren't really throwing the game. But as tank, I think in a lot of cases, it's so stressful because since you're in the front line all the time, you have that stress of the battle all the time. You have to be creating that space. And I think while it isn't impossible again to do, a lot of people don't really enjoy that feeling. And a lot of the times people would rather have a situation where you have high octane moments and then you have times to cool off, high octane moments, times to cool off, do that over and over again. Well, with tank, that's not really how the game flow goes. So again, I think is why a lot of people just don't really want to play them. Now, another thing that I guess more people could kind of connect to, if that doesn't really make sense to you why there's still little tank mains, is the fact that it seems like most of the tanks in the game are either slow-paced or have very basic kits. And what I'm going to say is not even all the tanks, but most of the main tanks. So Reinhardt, Orisa, Winston, all those characters, they can engage somewhat, they can hold off for a long time, they are all pretty strong in their own rights, but their kits are pretty basic. I mean, they can do one main thing, maybe some other stuff in very certain situations, and that's kind of it. And while they might be strong, and while you might need one on your team to win a round, you can kind of see how it might not be the funnest thing to go for. And as well, I think a problem about it is that it's kind of hard to outplay the enemies with these characters. I mean, when you're playing Orisa and you're shooting the enemy and you're positioning up your fortify on yourself, is that really that fun? I think for most people it's kind of not. And it's kind of hard to get huge outplay moments that you can get on support or that you can get on DPS, and not having those moments makes people not really want to pick up the main tank role. Now, on off tanks, this is a little bit different because D.Va can do a lot of damage, is pretty fast-paced, Roadhog can get some kills, Zarya is kind of in between, but I think especially on main tanks, it kind of makes sense to why so little people want to pick them, because while they are important and while they are reliable, it's kind of boring to play them, honestly, in a lot of cases. And I think where the fun part of playing a tank comes in is knowing where to position, knowing when to engage, knowing when to play defensive, knowing when to go in, and just knowing that you outplayed the enemy tanks. But a lot of the times in the lower ranks, it feels like both the tank players really just are kind of dinking around, just bashing each other, just playing around, making some space, not really focusing too much. Positioning doesn't matter as much, and most of the part, you're just kind of waiting for your DPS to pop off. I think you can kind of see how that isn't as fun. While in higher ranks, I think we're actually seeing a few more tank players because there is more seemingly outplay potential that shows up right there. And yeah, I think that's why there's a difference in between the amount of tanks depending on the ranks. And I guess talking about outplay potential right here, a thing I wanted to talk about was carrying a game. And yeah, for a lot of these characters, it feels like you can't really outplay the enemies too much to carry a game. I mean, you can just walk straight through the enemy Reinhardt, get an Earth Shatter off, or maybe use your Earth Shatter while the enemy Rein's going for a swing when they should be holding up their shield. Of course, that feels great, but in a lot of cases, it feels like you just can't really make too many outplays, too many carrying plays, and even if you do, let's say even if you do get a Reinhardt Shatter, you still are relying on your team a lot. You can't kill everybody by yourself like you can with a Genji. You can't kill everybody by yourself like you can with a Tracer, and you can't make those huge outplays in the enemy backline like a Tracer. I mean, even if you're someone like a Winston, if you jump in by yourself, you're probably going to die, and I think that's where a lot of people's problems kind of come in. The fact that, yes, these characters are, again, important, yes, they are powerful, but me, as a player, can't really, I guess, connect to them way too much, can't really carry my games way too much, so why would I be playing them when I could be playing the other roles that can do that maybe a little bit more? Now, personally, I don't really agree with that philosophy. I think these characters can do a lot, can do a ton of damage, and can be very fun and important to play, but you can kind of see why some people might not think that, and in most cases, the majority of people don't think that. So there, I guess, is a pretty big problem. But here we go, let's switch off to another problem that I think kind of shows up in the face of tank players, and that is that if you are trying to become a tank player, it's very hard to pick a main tank to try to play. I mean, it could be any tank, it could be a main tank or an off tank, but mainly just trying to pick a main hero, because as a tank, I think you really need to play a tank that fits your team comp and that fits all the other heroes on your team. If you have a Junkrat, yeah, you can pick Reinhardt and it'll work okay, but you should probably be picking Orisa, and even if you don't really like it way too much, it'll work a lot better for your team. And that can go really any direction, and I think that kind of creates a problem for a lot of players, because honestly, for a lot of players, they just want to get into a game, play one or two of their favorite heroes, and go on from there. But let's say that you only know how to play dive tanks. You can only play, let's say, Winston and D.Va, and you need some tank for another situation. Sure, you might be able to play them okay, but I think that the fact that you kind of are the one person on your team that everyone expects to switch because you're the tank, I think that's kind of hard. Overall, I feel like it makes a lot of tank players and mains believe that they have to main a huge variety of tank heroes, and when you look at tank players just played heroes, unless they're a D.Va main, which in one case, you know, they one-trick D.Va a lot of the time, for everyone else, you see that they have a vast amount of tanks being played, and that's kind of hard on you because it means that it'll take you longer to become good at any of them. You do have to learn more characters than other people, and while yes, with every single role you should learn a lot of different characters, for the most part you can fit most team comps with most supports as long as you just get a good amount of healing out, and you can fit most team comps with most DPS as long as you get enough damage out. It doesn't matter way too much. I mean, it does matter, but I don't think it matters nearly as bad as having the correct tank for the correct situation, which again puts quite a bit of pressure on the tank players. And other than just having the correct tank for the right team comp, another thing you have to remember is that you need the right tank for the right map as well. And I think that really sucks, because again, some characters are good and bad on certain maps. I think Doomfist is kind of relating to this as well, but I think especially with tanks, let's say Reinhardt, he is good on King's Row and a few other maps, but otherwise you probably shouldn't be playing him. You should probably be playing another tank. And I think that's kind of hard because, again, it makes it that you just are very dependent on your team and are very dependent on what map you're playing. And that forces you to play a lot of different characters, which again, I guess you could say is a good thing. You want your teammates to be able to play a lot of different characters. But when you're trying to have somebody main a role, especially a role that is not very desirable, you can see how that could just kind of push people even more away from trying to play the role, knowing that they have to learn a lot of different characters, they have to switch it up based off their map, and based off their teammates. That's kind of just asking a lot, I think, for a lot of players, especially when they just want to play what they want to play, which happens a lot in Overwatch competitive. Now, the final thing I want to talk about, which is a thing I think that pushes a lot of people that used to play tank away from playing tank, is the fact that when there's a new meta, they're essentially this is what always happens. There are 2 good tanks, 2 okay tanks, and 2 almost completely useless tanks. And that really sucks, because if you main a useless tank, well, you're just kind of screwed. And I think the problem is that there are so few tanks that this happens quite often. I mean, if you look at dive meta, there was like D.Va, Winston, and then you could sometimes play Zarya, or could play Roadhog, and then Orisa and Reinhardt. You know, you should not play that at all. And then you could switch that up for, you know, spam, for whatever, for Deathball, whatever it is. I think that's kind of hard on this role, because you have so little choice as a tank player depending on the meta. And let's say, even if you throw away the meta, and if you completely ignore it, there's still a small amount of choices for tanks compared to DPS, and even a somewhat small amount of choices of tanks compared to supports. And I think that really does make it kind of hard, because when there's just less characters to play that are less interactive, that are very important and that are needed every single game, yeah, you could kind of see how people might not want to be the one that actually has to deal with that, and why there are so little tank mains actually in your rounds. Now, for myself personally, I do really like playing tank. I think that the chance for you to outplay games or outplay the enemies is nice. I think the fact that you are such an important key part to your team, and the fact that you can pretty much always get your role because no one else wants to play it, is great. And honestly, I'd recommend that if you are a person that's thought about playing tank, I'd recommend to try it out, because I think it's fun, especially if you're playing someone like Winston or D.Va, or mainly just any of the off tanks, because they can do a lot for your game, and they can make your team comp a lot better and increase your chance of winning by a huge amount. Now, as always, if you want to just keep playing, DPS, support, that's great. But the world could definitely always use more tank heroes. And today I'll try to explain to you guys why that is the case. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below if you're a tank main. And if you are, tell me what tank you like to play. Or upvote somebody that says what tank they're playing. Because I want to see what is the most played tank in my comment section. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, have a wonderful day.